Maybe you can relate to the following, that you grew up in a house with a mom who was emotionally unavailable or really hard on you, and you felt that you were to be seen and not heard, just be a good girl, or you felt that you were unlovable or unworthy or not important, or that you weren't enough, and that you could never do anything that would make your mom happy, and that maybe your mom told you that you were to blame for things that she was dealing with. Well, today I'm going to introduce you to my mom and tell you the story of how I've healed my inner child wounds and my mother wound, and how I've forgiven her, and why it's important that you do that inner work for yourself as well. I'm Jill, your inner healing coach, and I am certified mental wellness, informed trauma, narcissistic specialist, and a brain spotting specialist. And I have done the work because I know how important it is, and I wanted to be part of breaking the cycle of abuse that I've lived with all my life. One of the first messages that I remember for as long as I can remember is that my mom and my dad told me that I was a mistake and I was never wanted. My mom and dad's marriage ended by the time I was 3 years old. So for the first 3 years of my life, it was quite stressful. But I'm understanding now, through the last year of my mom's life, why things just never worked out with my mom and me and our relationship, and why we struggled so much. And one of the things that I learned through being trauma informed is that it happened to us, not because of us. The other thing that I learned is that we can forgive, but that doesn't mean that the behavior and the things that were done to us are acceptable and that they should be excused, or it doesn't mean that they have to have access to us. It just means that we can forgive because it's the gift we give ourselves, and we release that trauma and we release any chances of bitterness by allowing ourselves to truly offer forgiveness, just like God has forgiven us. So I want to introduce you to this adorable picture. This is my mom when she was about 1 year old. I kind of think we look alike. And I see pictures of her before she passed away 6 years ago where we really look alike. And I now understand, because of the training that I've had, that my mom was not trying purposely to treat me the way that she did. It was that her mom had the same generational abuse that she passed down to my mom. And I don't know my grandmother's childhood story to really be able to expound on that, to help myself understand and to help all of you understand. But the point of the story that I want to share that I think is really important is there was a time in my mom's and my relationship about 3 years before she got sick where I had to remove myself from a relationship with her because it was just too toxic. And it wasn't until her last year when she called me and reached out to me and said, Jill, I'm sick with cancer. And that year, I just forgave and forgave and forgave and just poured love into her. Now, I have a video on this channel where I talk about the forgiveness. It was literally filmed like a day or two after my mother passed away. And I was able to really share the gift of what forgiveness did for me and how it opened up the door for closure. But I've had even more closure because now I have compassion. And if I could have my mom sitting in front of me, I would be able to look at her and just say, I'm so sorry for what you endured, and that you had a loveless life and you never felt that you were worthy. You never felt that you were good enough. You never felt that you were lovable or important. And when you carry those 4 childhood wounds, they are in your body. Our nervous system holds them, and our body doesn't lie. So talk therapy keeps using our logical part of our brain. I don't want that to fall over. Our logical part of our brain, which is our neocortex, and our limbic system, which is back here, which is all connected to our eyes, which is the feeling center, which is our amygdala, which is tucked inside your brain, where it's your fear, flight, freeze. And then you have your hippocampus, is where your long-term memories are stored. And the more you have trauma as a baby in utero, you're born to your early childhood to your 4, your hippocampus gets smaller and smaller. And as you go through life, if you are dealing with more chronic stress, more trauma, you can imagine that your amygdala gets bigger and your hippocampus gets smaller. Thus, why we have so many people with brain fog. That's why I think we have so many people that end up with dementia and have Parkinson's disease and are misdiagnosed, I think, with ADHD and all these things, because a diagnosis puts them in a box and we forget to peel the layers back and have a trauma-informed lens, which is very compassionate, and asks questions and gets curious. Why did my mom treat me that way? Why was my mom so incredibly triggered and angry all the time? Why did she abuse me? Why did she hit me? Why did she yell at me? Why did she tell me I wasn't wanted? Why was that the message that I had my whole life? Why did she blame me when relationships with men didn't go well after my parents were divorced? Why did she hit me? Why did she do the things she did? Well, because, and there's no excuses, this isn't excusing her behavior, even though as a child you believe it's your fault when your parents get divorced or when your mother or your father is angry at you, even though that's how we perceive it, when adults aren't behaving as they should as adults, it's what was done to you, not because of you. And my mom had a really rough childhood. And the part of the story I'm going to share might trigger you, and I apologize for that in advance. But my mom as a teenager was forced to have an abortion. And she was hidden away, and she was put away, and she was shunned, and she was forced to have an abortion. And that was never told to anybody until a couple months before she died. She shared it with me. So she carried that trauma that was done to her whole life. She had so much guilt and shame around it that she never shared it with people. So she never got the chance to heal that. And that trauma and that ripping of that child out of your body when the body is preparing itself for life is very traumatic on the woman's body. Forget what it's doing emotionally to the woman. And that baby didn't deserve to die because the parents of my mom didn't want my mom to embarrass them, and they didn't want to be the black sheep of the neighborhood or the community because they were wealthy, and they didn't want anybody to look at them poorly. And I personally don't believe that a child should ever be ripped from a mother's womb for any circumstance at any time. I believe that it's not the child's fault for what happened to the woman or to two adults who chose to have sex and a baby was brought forth and life was given, because that's God's and it's God's to take away. So that's part of why I think my mom carried so much trauma into being a wife and a woman. And I'm not sure my mom was ever raised in a way to really desire to be a mom, because she had a mom that was so incredibly mean, domineering, and bossy, and she was probably a narcissistic woman. I don't remember my grandmother ever being loving, ever being kind. So she was another woman that I had that was abusive in my life, and she rejected me, and that like put on the rejection and abandonment issues in my life besides my mom, but really my dad who abandoned me, and we're going to talk about that in Healing the Father Wound next week. So my mom was unable to really love me the way that a child deserves to be loved, because you don't look at a child's picture and say, I'm going to abuse them, I'm going to neglect them, I'm not going to love them, I'm not going to be kind, or those things. It's that our own trauma gets re-triggered. Why? Because talking about it and using your logical, rational brain, your neofrontal precortex, isn't the part of the brain that can change what the body is holding on to. Your vagus nerve is your biggest nerve in your body, and it goes through your entire body from your head to your gut. And it is the part that sends messages and the neurotransmitters from your gut to your head. And that's why we need to heal the gut. We need to strengthen the nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. And our sympathetic is where we have fight, flight, freeze, which you are in utero with, and it grows with you. So if your mother is totally stressed when she's pregnant, you're going to be a baby that comes out with too much cortisol in your body. You're going to have a strong fight or flight and freeze. Because the one thing that the baby doesn't have in utero is nurture. So we want to give the baby nurture after it's born. But if the mother is in a traumatic relationship or doesn't have the skill set to be a loving, doting, nurturing mother, and she's in a abusive or stressful marriage or relationship or familial relationships, she's going to be stressed, and that gets passed to the child. And then if that child for the first 4 years of their life is kind of shown that they're not good enough, they're not important, they're not worthy, and they're not lovable, that becomes a trauma that the child carries for the rest of their life, because they perceived I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'm not important. And I'm never going to be good enough. And then it starts a behavior where a child starts to people please. And my mom was probably constantly trying to get her mother's affection, trying to people please until she didn't care anymore. And then they had a very hard-hitting relationship, which affected my mom. And then by the time my mom was in her marriage that I don't think her parents were totally happy with, and then my mom got divorced, which her parents weren't happy with. And then I was at my parents' divorce ceremony, which in the Jewish religion, they pronounced my mother dead in front of me at 3 years old. And then I had to go with my dad and go away from my mom after the ceremony. So I'm a 3-year-old, so happy in my little dress outside, prancing around. My parents are doing their thing after the ceremony. And I have these cute little patent leather shoes on that I've never forgotten. I've never forgotten what I looked like that day and how carefree I was. And then how incredibly traumatic it was for me. Because my dad got remarried very quickly within 2 weeks after my parents got divorced ceremonially. And the woman that he married was extremely, extremely mean. I referred to her as my stepmonster, never my stepmother, because she was very unkind and never gentle and never accepting and never loving to us children, to my brother and I. And a child takes that on when an adult does these hurtful things and they blame themselves. But it isn't what is about you. It was what was done to you. That's a big distinction. And that's why through my training, through my understanding, that I'm able to look at my own life and see how I took those patterns from childhood and took them into every relationship I had in my first marriage and into my marriage. And I've lived that out to want to make myself be good enough, be worthy, be enough, be lovable. And that's all I've ever wanted. And then these behaviors of codependency and people pleasing, and then other parts of you that don't know how to handle the trauma, or I didn't even recognize the trauma, didn't know that I was traumatized until about 5 years ago. I started to understand things just weren't right. And it wasn't until I had this training that I was able to look back on my mom's life and say, wow, so our childhood was triggering my mom. And that's the same thing that happened to me. So I brought these traumatized children that we adopted into my life, and it was re-traumatizing me. Their trauma was re-traumatizing me. No excuse for any of the way that I acted or reacted to their trauma or their needs, but I was so empty and didn't understand the emptiness and didn't understand what was going on, that I wasn't able to get the love and the attention and the affection from my husband, that I wasn't able to be the kind of woman that I wanted to be, or the mother that I wanted to be, or the friend. So I'm sorry if you've been in my life and I have ever been, that I've ever reacted out of my own abandonment and rejection and not worthy, not good enough, not lovable, not important enough. And I ever acted and reacted out of that is really because of the way that I grew up. And I had unresolved childhood trauma that came out as an adult. No excuse. And it's the same thing for your mom, that right now, if your mother's alive and she's been hard on you, or she wasn't able to give you and she was emotionally empty, or she was emotionally hard or rough, or she seemed frustrated or angry, as an adult, you have to start to ask yourself, what happened to her? Why was she like that? What was going on in her life that she wasn't able to be what I needed? And then start to forgive those parts for her. And that doesn't mean she gets to keep doing those behaviors to you now. And doesn't mean that you have to accept those behaviors now. It just means that you're able to forgive them because you have compassion for the pain and the childhood trauma that she endured that she never grew out of. And it's our responsibility to do this work. And that's why I became certified in all of these things. That's why I've gone on to get educated so that I could take the mess and give it back to God and say, let's make a message and give other people hope and give people the understanding. And it's so that I could break the cycle and I could help my children not have to continue that cycle on and not have watching me be such a broken shell of a person versus a thriving, loving, whole person that can completely forgive myself and forgive others. And that's really what I'm calling you to, is to really take a look at yourself and a look at those that you need to forgive, and remember to come from an eye of compassion for being trauma informed and say, what happened to them And it's perfect, right? The holidays are coming and you see lots of people that are really stressed. Why are they stressed? Why is that person so angry in their car? Why are they cutting me off? Why is the person that's a cashier struggling so much? And another part of my mom that she grew up with is my mom was really pretty. This is her high school graduation pictures. And she was absolutely gorgeous. But my mom's mom was jealous of that and was not loving because my mother and her mother competed. And my mother didn't feel good enough, so she put her child down and made her feel bad about herself because she didn't feel good enough about herself. And that's the same thing with everybody we deal with in our lives. Those that are insecure will make us feel small and will hurt us and will try and control us and manipulate us to believe that we aren't good enough. And that's part of what I want to say to you is that there's 1 in 3 women right now that are being domestically abused. And that can be physically, financially, sexually, or emotionally. And we need to come together and really understand that if we want to recover and rebalance any part of our bodies, we have to do the inner work to release that trauma, because our brain's job is to do 2 things. Number 1, to keep us alive. Thank you for our brain, God. And number 2 is to keep us out of danger. It never wants us to experience the danger that it perceives is happening now. Even though I'm safe right now, my body could be perceiving that I'm in danger by sharing this story with you. And then you could feel your heart rate go up and you could feel a little bit anxious. And that's why some people have anxiety and panic attacks. It's not because you're in danger right now. It's because of the perceived danger that your body thinks is happening from something that happened to you years ago. That's what PTSD is. And complex PTSD just happens from people who have lived a traumatic life and chronic stress all of their life. They've had many traumatic moments in their lives, and we can heal that. And PTSD doesn't get healed by talking about it because it re-traumatizes the person. It gets healed by doing things like the somatic work that I do that regulates the nervous system, and by brain spotting. Why brain spotting? Because the brain is connected to the nervous system, the limbic system, like I showed you, and that is your entire body. So we strengthen that vagus nerve, and we strengthen your nervous system, and we regulate it. We co-regulate it together in a loving, safe, non-judgmental coaching relationship. And that's the same thing you need to do with the people in your life. The only way that you're ever going to heal is when you feel safe to feel. You have to feel to heal. And all of my life, I didn't feel safe to feel because I felt like I was going to be judged by my feelings, or I was told my feelings were wrong, or I was told I was too much and I'm too negative and I'm too this. And all I wanted was to be loved. And that's what I kept asking for my mom. And I did the same thing in my marriage, and I'm doing it now to explain so that you can understand that the codependency, people pleasing, judging yourself, the inner critic, all the parts of you that you probably say are bad are actually protector parts trying to help your body do what the brain does best, protect you from the perceived danger that it feels is happening. And until we get that inner trauma, that childhood trauma, to not be alive in us, and whatever traumatic experience you had, a car accident, a parent died, a child died, you watched somebody die, or any of those things, or you were in a car, I said car accident, but any of those things, or like medical things, if you had really scary medical events. I had many from the time I was a child through my adulthood. I've had many experiences, so I'm like traumatized from the medical community. And what you need to do is you need to do the inner healing work to tell the body that it's no longer in danger. And once it feels safe, and we do it in a slow enough manner where the body leads the way, the body can heal. And that's why it's so important to heal the trauma of your mother and your relationship. If it was hard, if you had a narcissistic mother, if you had an abusive mother, if you had a non-emotionally available mother, and if she ever made you feel like you weren't good enough or worthy or lovable or important. And now's the time to do that. So I'm gonna allow you to go onto the description of this video, right? And click on that to learn more about working with me and learn more about coaching versus therapy and learn more about the work that I do. And I invite you to really do that today and ask yourself, Am I ready to forgive first myself, forgive my mom, and move on so that God can then do the healing work that only He can do in you? So I just say thank you for watching this video, and I hope this strikes conversations between you and others, and share the video if it struck a chord in you and you feel like it's an important message. Share it with others, because we want to invite as many women into this healing journey, especially in our 50s. We've carried it for too long, ladies, and now's the time for us to get our body to recover and rebalance and to thrive for as long as God keeps us here. Thank you for watching, and have a blessed day.